today's lecture, we're going to have more examples on how to open and read a text file for processing the data inside it. And we will start our examples by a case study. This case study is for processing a special type of files that are called comma-separated values files. CSV is short for comma-separated values. So first, let us define what is a CSV, and then we will show you how to process such files. A comma-separated values or CSV file is a simple text format, so it's a text, a string, used to store a list of records. Usually, if we have a file, each line represents a record. Now, a comma is used as a delimiter, separators, to separate the fields. And there is another name for fields, it's called a column. So we have a line of text inside the file, which is called a record, and each record has fields, and these fields are separated by comma. And these fields, some of them could be string, could be integers, could be double, could be booleans, and so on. So whenever we have a line of text and we have some data inside it separated by commas, then each line is called a comma-separated values. Now this format is commonly used to transfer data between a spreadsheet like Excel, database like Access, or custom applications programs. So sometimes if you want to have data and you want to transfer this data into your program, they use this format inside a text file for reading the data. Here is an example for a CSV file for transactions in a grocery store. Notice that the first line consists of titles for each column or for each field. Notice that the titles are separated by commas. So we have SKU, which is short for stock keeping unit. This is like a barcode. The second field is a quantity. The third is a price. And the fourth is description. So in the second line, in fact, this is the first record of the data for the transaction. So this is the first transaction. So for the first transaction, the value of SKU is 4039, and the quantity is 50, and the price is 0.99, and this is for a soda item. Our next question is how to process such data, in other words, how to read such data if it is available in a text file, and separate the fields and save them into primitive data type variables defined in our programs. Notice that we cannot use the next methods that are defined inside the scanner class. Why? Because the next methods assume that we have a white space as a delimiter if we want to read more than one data on a single line. An example of a white space is a space, tab, or an enter. As an example, if you try to use next int to read SKU for the first record, then it will give you an input mismatch exception error, because it will read the comma, and comma is not considered as an integer, and then an exception is raised. So therefore, we are going to use the wrapper classes for the integer, and specifically we are going to use the parse method for converting the number as a string into an integer primitive data type. Let us show you how to do that by writing a general algorithm for processing a comma-separated values if they are available in a text file. This is the general algorithm that we are going to use to process a CSV file if we assume that the first line inside the file represents titles for fields or columns of records. So first we need to skip the header of the file and then repeat while we have not reached the end of the file the following steps. Now when we say repeat while we have not reached the end of the file, it means we are going to have a while loop and we are going to read the file line by line until we reach the end of the file. For each line we read from the file, we need to follow these 4 steps. In the first step, we are going to read an entire line which represents a record from the file and save it as a string. Remember that a record consists of fields, and these fields are separated by commas. So how to separate the fields? They are separated by commas inside a string. Notice that we cannot read the data by using next methods, because if we try to do that, and it's going to read comma as part of the data, and then an input mismatch exception will be raised as an error. So therefore, we need to find a method to separate the fields that are inside the string, and we are going to use the comma as the delimiter for the fields. So in step 2, we are going to create an array of strings from the line that we have read in part 1, where array 0 will be the value of the first field, and array 1 is the value of the second field, and array 2 is the value of the third field, and so on. In other words, the line that we have in step 1, we are going to split it into many strings. Each field will be saved into a separate string. So we are going to have an array of strings. And here we will show you how to do that by using a special method inside a string that is called split. And as a parameter to the method, you specify the delimiter. So you are going to specify comma. And we will show you an example on how to split a data if it is inside a string, and if this data is separated by a comma. Now in step number 3, after separating each field into separate strings, then we need to convert any numeric fields from the array of strings to the appropriate numeric data type so that we can save them into primitive data types inside our programs. And this can be done by calling the static parse methods that are available in the numeric data type wrappers. Then after saving these fields into primitive data types, then we can process the fields for certain calculations that is required by the program. So let us show you an example on how to split fields inside a string if they are separated by commas. The record in this example is taken from the transaction.txt file that we covered in the previous slide. The first field was for the SKU, the second field was for the quantity, the third was for the price, and the fourth field was for the description. So we assume now this record is saved as a single string in a variable called line. So now how to separate these fields and save them into separate strings? To do that, we are going to call the method split that is already defined in the string class, and we are going to supply the delimiter, which is the comma, as an input parameter to this method. After the method is called, it's going to retain an array of a string, so that the first array will be for the first field, the second array will be for the second field, and so on. So in our example, after we call the split method for this line, it will separate these 4 fields into 4 strings. In the first string, it's going to have the number 4039. In the second string, it's going to have the number 50. In the third string, it's going to have the number 0.99. And in the last string, it's going to have the word soda. Notice that all of them are strings. So this number 4039 is saved as a string. It is not saved as a number. So therefore, we have to convert these numbers if we want to deal with them inside our programs as a primitive data types using parse methods that are defined inside the wrapper classes. Let us apply this algorithm on the transactions data file using JGrasp. This is the data file for the transactions of items sold in a grocery store. Each line consists of a record of an item, and each record consists of fields separated by commas. The first line represents the header of the file, and it represents the titles of each field. So when we read the data from this file, we need to skip the first line and continue reading the records from the second line. We have already prepared part of the program. The name of the class for this program is called Transaction Reader. We have defined the necessary data we need for our program. For SKU defined as integer, quantity as integer, price as double, description as a string, and the file name as a scanner object is called inFile and initialized to null. In addition to that, we have defined a counter that counts the number of lines we are reading from the file. To start, we need to import the necessary classes we need in our program. So let us import these classes. First, we need to import findNotFoundException class, and it is in java.io. So we say import java.io.file.notFoundException, and then we need also to import the class definition for file, and it is also inside java.io. So we say import java.io.file, and finally we need to import the scanner class, and this is import java.util.scanner. After importing the necessary classes for our program, now we start writing the program. Since we are going to read from files, then we need to put the code inside try and catch block. So we will say try and here we're going to say catch, and the first catch will be for file not found exception, and the variable name for the exception will be called exp, and inside it we are going to display a message system.out.println. If there is a problem reading from the file or file is not found, then we need to display a message that says cannot find the file, and we need to print the file name, which is a transactions.txt, and we will assume that this is the last line in our program and there is nothing after that, so there is no need to exit from the program. But for safety, we will say that we don't need to continue the program because the file is not opened successfully, so we'll say system.exit and 0 so that we can terminate from the program safely. So let us start reading from the file inside the try block. So inside the try block, first we need to open the file, and to open the file we create an object from the file class and supply this object as an input parameter to the scanner. So here we say nFile is equal to new scanner, and we are going to create an object from the file class inside the scanner constructor by saying file, and the name of the file is transactions.txt. Whenever there is an error opening this file, then an exception will be raised that is called find not found exception and will be caught by the catch block. Next, we need to skip the first line because the first line is the header line for the data. So we are going to skip it by saying nFile.nextLine. And I'm going to write a comment here, skip the header line. And then we need to write a loop that will continuously read the data from the file line by line. So we will say while, and for testing for end of file, we are going to use the has next line method, that is a Boolean method. So we say nFile has next line, and this will tell us whether we have a line to read in the file or not. If there's no file to read from the file, then it will return false, and then we will exit from the while loop. Now inside the loop, we are going to increment the variable for the line number, and this is called line number plus a plus, and then we are going to read from the file line by line. We are going to read each record into a variable called line, and how to read that from the file, we say nFile.nextLine. So now each record we are going to read from the file will be saved into a variable as a string called line. Because this line is a record, and we know that records consist of fields separated by commas, now we need to split these fields and save them into separate strings. And we do that by first defining an array of a string, and I'm going to call it field. And then we are going to call the split method of the string class. So we say line.split, and the separator or the delimiter is comma. So we need this method to split the line into multiple strings based on the separator comma. And after that, each field will be saved into a separate string inside an array of a string called field. So the first field will be for the SKU, the second field will be for the quantity, and so on. So let us parse those data one by one and save them into the corresponding data that we have defined in our program in this area. So first, SKU. So we say SKU is equal to integer dot parse int, and this will be in field 0 because field 0 is for the SKU. Next, we need to parse the quantity. So quantity is equal to integer dot parse int, and we will put field 1. And for the price, it's equal to double. This is the wrapper class, and then we call the parse method. So it is parse double, and we supply field 2 which is the third field inside this record. And finally, for the description, it is simply a copy of the field because it is a string, and we are going to save it into description, and description is already defined as a string. Seems that there is a small problem, and here this is supposed to be field 3, not 0. And also I'm going to turn on the line numbers for the statements inside the program. After reading the data from the file, we just want to show this data on the output screen. So here we are going to display a message, system.out.println, by saying how many items sold. So we are going to print the quantity, followed by the message of, and here we are going to display the description. Also, we need to display the value of the SKU. So we will say SKU followed by the price, and this is the price for each item, so we are going to display the word each. So what will be printed on the output screen? Sold followed by the quantity of the item description, and we print the SKU value followed by the price, which is at a price for each item. Finally, we have already discussed before that for the parse methods, if the conversion was not successful, then those methods raised an exception, and the exception name was number format exception. So we have to put that into the catch statement so that whenever we have this error, we need to catch it and display a message. So we will say catch number format exception, and we are going to define the variable for it, exp. And here we are going to display a message that there is a conversion problem. So system.out.println, and we will say problem with number conversion, and we would like to specify at which line. And this is why we needed that variable for the line number, and we will say line number to tell us exactly where this error has occurred. Now the program is ready, so we need to test it. We are going to run it. So there is an error. Seems we are missing one of the brackets. So let us run it again. And again we have another problem. Again we have a spelling mistake, and here it says number, so we have to put E. Again run it and see. And the program is running successfully. So let us see the output. As you can see, it has read all the items and displayed them on the output screen. Now let us try to check that how the parse method can raise an exception if the conversion is not successful. I'm going to go to the transaction file. I'm going to change the first field of the first record, and I'm going to put, let's say, 0.6, because it's going to read it as an integer. So we need to save the file. Now let's go back to our program and try to run it. And as you can see here, an exception has been raised, and it says a problem with number conversion at line number 1. But since our data, the first line is a header, now here when it says that line number 1, it is misleading. So we have to say that this is at line number 2 inside the file. And to change that, we simply go to our program, and instead of starting from line number equal to 0, we are going to start from line number 1. So let us run the program again. And as you can see now, it says a problem with number conversion at line 2. Let us correct the problem and save the file. And now let us run for the last time. As you can see, all the data has been read successfully from the file.